So welcome folks to the part of the, in the brown bag series here at the TRC. We do these weekly or bi-weekly, pretty much weekly at this point. And it provides sort of a semi-informal opportunity to give a little presentation and have a conversation about things related to transportation. In this case, we have folks from geography who presented at the American Association of Geographers Conference, which was this past spring in Chicago. And so we have 5 presenters today who attended that conference, including myself, Pablo Bose, Megan Cope. Both Pablo and Megan are professors in geography. Okay. Here at UVM, and then Xiao, who is a graduate student at Resner. Jeff Batista used to be a graduate student colleague of mine here at the TRC and is now a PhD student at McGill University in geography. And I was a former grad student here at the TRC and now I'm a research staff member here. So without further ado, I think I'll let folks get started because I think everyone probably has a lot to cram into a small space in terms of introducing what they were doing, and then hopefully we can reserve a half the time, if possible, or maybe 20 minutes at the end to discuss how do we see geography and transportation continuing to sort of work together at UVM, because it's great really to see so many people that are overlapping between those two here, and we want to keep that going. So I think to start off with, we have, this is you, Megan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the clicker.
All right.
Take it away.
Okay. 5 minutes, right?
Go for it.
Really fast. Oops. Right. Oh, this is back. Upside down, that's why. Okay. Just going to show all of that at once. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the project that Brian Lee and I have been working on for several years now. And one of the backdrops of this project has been the sort of public discourse around young people moving to cities, particularly the sort of millennial myths of urbanism. And part of my and Brian's interest in this was to contextualize those myths a little bit, maybe debunk them to some degree. Brian Taylor, when he was here at UVM last year, I think he did some really good work in that regard, identifying the ways that much of the youth population in cities is in fact low income and low skilled workers and unemployed young people. So the idea that millennials are wholesale moving to urban areas and changing the transportation networks and the housing demands and so forth needs to be a little bit tempered. Now, a lot of those myths are really oriented toward post-college populations. Brian and I were really looking at high school teens. So with the idea that high school teens are a bit of an ignored population, and a lot of their sort of journey to school data is about K through 8 kids, and a lot of the journey to work data is, of course, workers, usually post-college age. So it's a bit of a niche that we identified, and we wanted to look at what kinds of circumstances teens encounter. So a few research questions. These are like the really broad research questions. I'll just kind of hit on a few of these. So what are the effects of current combinations of land use and transportation planning on teens' opportunities for mobility and access? So where do they want to go? How do they get there? How would they prefer to get there? And so forth. How are different built environments more or less conducive to teens' independent mobility, especially in non-urban areas? And when I say independent mobility, ideally that would be things like walking, cycling, or taking the bus. However, independent mobility for many teens in this area actually means having a car. So we're interested in the sort of backdrop, the built environments, the context. And specifically, we were interested in the non-urban populations because that, again, you know, a great deal of our American population is suburban. In Vermont, we're talking suburbia and a sort of rural sprawl. And we were curious what kinds of impacts those land use and transportation networks would have on teens. And then we were curious, too, what teens' own preferences and their opinions on mobility and access were. So that's the big project. I'll just very briefly tell, I don't know why this is strangely animated here, but in our main methods, we had a couple of other methodologies that aren't represented here, but our main two methods were a large online survey with all of the parents were invited from 2 high schools, and then we had a linked survey. If they gave permission, their teens could answer a teen online survey. So we worked in South Burlington High School and CVU. I'll talk about those in a second. Just very quickly, oh, and then we also did a focus, actually in this very room, follow focus group with some participatory mapping and a couple other methodologies to try and understand more contextually what teens' experiences were. Our final N was pretty low between the 2 high schools for various reasons, but we did manage to get 253 parent surveys and 147, again, linked teen surveys. Just a couple highlights. We asked, you know, how much do you walk or bike, what kinds of resources are available to you, and so forth. We also asked about the social context. One of the funny ones was that 76% of parents said that they had travel rules for their teens, like curfews, or you can't go there, you must be with us so-and-so type of person, or whatever. But according to teens, only 46% of them had travel rules. So there's some different perceptions of parenting styles there. So you get sort of a general flavor. We're interested in both people's access to physical infrastructure and what kinds of resources they had, but also the social context. We did these 2 high schools. One is, and I'm already out of time. One is, you know, South Burlington is fairly relatively dense for suburban settings. Has a good public bus system. The high school is down the street from the mall. I'm not sure malls are very appealing anymore, but to the extent that mattered in terms of things like after-school jobs, it's close to parks and recreation. There's a lot of teen destinations that are fairly reachable from the high school itself. CVU, of course, is in Heinsberg, which offers few teen amenities, to put it politely. And indeed, it's not statistically significant, but we did find differences in the rates of licensure among the high school teens. The 2 high schools were very similarly represented across grades, gender, et cetera. So in South Burlington, we did indeed find slightly later age and slightly higher levels, lower levels of licensure, driver's license, than at CVU. That's also reflected in traveling to and from school. So the South Burlington students were much more likely to walk or bike. I mean, given the population of Heinsberg, there's very few people who are able to walk or bike. It's hilly. There's twisty, pretty dangerous roads. There's obviously seasonal effects and so forth. Busing was fairly equal. And then certainly an outlier was that CVU has a massive driving population. And I think this is pretty interesting too if you think about town planning, the ways that we often pay attention to major employers, but really the high school is a huge magnet for traffic in Heinsberg. Okay, wrapping up. So in terms of what are the impacts of land use planning and transportation decisions on young people, we found that the opportunities varied really significantly by age and also location. So we were looking at CDU is a regional high school, so it includes people from Charlotte, Shelburne, Heinsberg, Williston, and St. George. And that mattered a lot. Less variation by gender or siblings and other variables that we looked at. How do young people move around, navigate, and access space in their daily lives? Basically, this is the title of my talk, right? I think it was spatial entrapment and hypermobility, right? So they're very dependent on rides before they get their license, but then they're immediate, as soon as they get their license, they're sort of launched into this high level of mobility with access to cars. And in fact, 40% of our population between the two high schools, 40% of parents said they had bought another vehicle when their kids had gotten their license. So this is pretty intense automobile use. As drivers, the teens certainly had independent mobility, and it was pretty much tempered only by the graduated driver's licenses and family rules. Okay, and then I just will say that teens, in terms of their own views, typically they recognized the privilege that they had access to. They also really liked being driven around. The younger teens were like, oh, I don't have problems getting anywhere because my parents are perfectly happy to drive me wherever I want to go. And we did have several quotes like that. It was very funny. So, my sort of urbanist ideal of having teens completely, living in walkable, public transit-rich, diverse, mixed-use neighborhoods is not at all supported by what's actually happening in our region. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Megan. So I didn't provide any slides. I'm just going to talk about what we did. So myself, Justin Spinney, who's at Cardiff, and Denver Nixon, who's at University of British Columbia, organized a set of panels called Mobility and Morality. And our interest was really in looking at debates around different kinds of transportation planning, primarily things like bicycling infrastructure, bike lanes, separated bike lanes, things like that, light rail, these different kinds of things, and not so much just the cases of it, but what kinds of arguments are mobilized both for and against these kinds of transit planning. And so we had a wide range. So we had actually two different panels, or two different sets of linked sessions. The mobility and morality ones were almost all Europeans and a few Canadians. And we had a linked set which was on like race and mobility, which were all American. But there are a lot of similar kinds of cases around. The American ones were more focused on cycling in minority communities and kind of those kind of things. So anyway, it's really, really interesting presentations. Again, a range of different ones, still really focused on what kinds of arguments people are making for and against. The paper that myself and Denver actually gave, originally we were looking at this in the context of Vancouver. Vancouver is where I grew up, and Vancouver is where Denver is based. And we were looking at three specific examples. The city's Greenways program, the conversion of the Burrard Street Bridge, one full lane into separated bike lanes, and the building of a light rail connection from the airport. We were about halfway through all of what we were doing and then abandoned it all when the Premier of British Columbia committed the region to a transit referendum. Committed to a transit referendum for a very ambitious transit plan for the whole Greater Vancouver Regional District. It would raise $250 million a year through a 0.5% tax within the region, and an enormous number of new improvements. So this covered 13 municipalities, new bridges, new roads, a large expansion of the bus system, new light rail, dedicated bicycle infrastructure, all of this. They launched this referendum in November of last year. And it was completed in July. It lost. So the no side won So as we were going through the process, so we were very much in the midst of the referendum when we presented our work, but even then it was very clear. At the outset of the referendum, most of the polls showed roughly 78% of eligible residents in favor of this transit plan. When the final results were known in July, it was 62% against. And not simply all the suburbs. In Vancouver I think was, the city of Vancouver proper was 50 to 49 against. So there were only 2 places that actually supported this wide referendum, and one was the University District, and another was one of the islands that's sort of covered within the municipalities. But we were really curious as to how this shift had happened, what kinds of arguments were made both pro and against. We've done already a number of interviews with transit planners, so TransLink is the major authority that's in charge of this, with some officials from the city of Vancouver, a few of the other municipalities as well. And as much as I have not enjoyed interviewing a few people from the No campaign, so those who mobilized against this, and there were several different reasons that there was a mobilization against this. I think it's the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. They were one of the big, like, this is the biggest waste of money since the last thing that we got upset about. And so they were, but they basically came in and they were one of the big mobilizers. They ran expensive ad campaigns. They did a lot of door-to-door information sessions, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of mobilization that they did. There's been a lot of, and partway through the referendum, TransLink changed its CEO. There's a lot of controversy over the fact that he got a golden parachute, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of stuff in some of the polling that we looked at where it was really anger not at the plan per se, but really at the agency that was supposed to be carrying it out. So it was, it's been really fascinating. Again, while we had been doing this other work, it seemed kind of silly to not be focusing on this. And so we sort of rethought the way in which we were looking at this. So it's been quite fascinating. The big question now is what comes next. So what does Vancouver do? What do a number of the other, Surrey is the other really major growth center in the Greater Vancouver Regional District and the metropolitan area, and so they're proposing to kind of go it on their own, perhaps use a toll bridge system, different kinds of things like this, but it sort of throws it up in the air. So what do you do now? Here you have this idea of an integrated regional transit network plan. It's all the things that are supposed to be, this is what people want. This is how they're going to get to jobs, to school, to other kinds of things, the most efficiently, and et cetera, and that plan goes up in dust. So what do you do then? How do you accommodate the differences in population growth, et cetera? So it's something we're really excited to continue to look at and see what the next stages are. Out of those 2 sets of sessions, we're doing an edited volume, not a book, but a special issue. So we're sort of in the process of putting that together.
Great.
Thanks.
But yeah, we can sort of save conversation for all of these until afterwards. I think. Shall next? No, this is Jeff.
Do you want me to go last to the bit about the organization of the event?
Yeah, so Shao, if you can just sort of click through 4 slides, I think. And then it's, next one is you.
Okay. So this study I'm presenting AAG conference is about expanding transportation recreation opportunities for diversity and democracy. And this is part of a project that I work with my advisor, Dr. Manning, to exploring what are barriers for racial ethnic minority groups to visit national parks, and how transportation can do to encourage more racial ethnic minority groups to visit parks more often. So for this study, It's based on there are problems in some national park recreation settings because recreation areas sometimes are designed for the average visitor's recreation demand while neglect some low density and racial ethnic minority groups. And the literature is continuous to find that some racial ethnic minority groups were underrepresented in parks, especially in national parks, and has pulled over three main hypotheses, including marginality, subcultural, and discrimination hypothesis. And studies have found that there are differences of activity preference by racial ethnic groups. And based on the very tight linkage between transportation and recreation, this study is using a framework, the recreation opportunity spectrum, incorporating the context of transportation, to really explore the difference of the visitors' desirabilities for indicators, for those indicators to explore the difference for those indicators to see how transportation can help to encourage the racial ethnic minority groups to visit parks more often. And three research questions in this study, including the difference of desirabilities for the transportation recreation opportunity spectrum indicators for different transportation modes and for different racial ethnic groups, and for the different for the difference among different recreation settings. And the method that I used in this study mainly are on-site visitor surveys that across 5 national parks that range from including urban parks, urban proximate parks, and rural parks. And we collected 956 questionnaires. As for the measurement, this study covered 3 transportation modes, including driving, public transportation, and biking. And each transportation modes have different dimensions, and we are mostly using the multivariate analysis of the variance for the data analysis. As for the time limit, I'm just showing one table that compare the difference of desirabilities of visitors when they driving in national park areas, and compare desirabilities for visitors from urban parks, urban proximate parks, and rural parks. And the red box has highlighted the indicators that the significant difference has found. And we can see that visitors from rural parks are more likely to read the higher desirabilities for landscape characters, while as for the rural park visitors report higher desirabilities for safety and security indicators. So the main conclusion of this study highlights the difference of the desirabilities for the TROS indicators, and supported the subcultural and discrimination hypothesis, and the desirabilities of the TROS indicators different for various transportation modes, and transportation can provide a variety of recreation opportunities through different recreation settings, and those findings can help the national park managers and transportation planners to better design and manage their transportation facilities and opportunities to better satisfy a broader range of visitors' recreation demand.
I think I will go next. So the research I was presenting is an extension of some research we've been doing here, asking how different types of streetscapes affect the way that people sort of interact in those spaces, the quality of the experience, and the real indicator we're going after here was safety. And of course, safety is a very broad thing in and of itself. So, you know, within the sort of microgeography of this street space, what is it that impacts sense of security in terms of traffic? What affects sense of security in terms of, you know, sort of interpersonal safety, like crime, for instance, and then looking at both sort of quantitative measures of actual incidents versus perception of safety. And these can be really sort of different from one another. And one of the really interesting facets of presenting this work at AAG is that I was in a crime geography group, which is a very different group of people than the folks that I'm used to sort of presenting this with in the transportation context. And so they had, some of my results actually ended up being very counter to some of the theory and evidence that literature has produced. And so it provoked a pretty interesting conversation. So just to sort of show a few quick things, first let's look at perceived safety. And this was measured using a survey. It was an online survey that looked at streetscape images and asked people to say which place basically looks safer in a very general sense. So it wasn't getting at crime versus traffic, or it was just which place would you sort of rather be and would you feel more secure in? And then we compared that with sort of micro design or streetscape design factors such as the amount of tree canopy on that streetscape, the number of buildings along the block, things like the proportions of that space, so like the height of the buildings versus the width. And you can see generally tree canopy was just sort of universally an indicator of people's feeling safer. People really liked having tree canopy on a street. This is counter to a lot of literature on crime geography that would suggest that providing hiding places for, you know, potential people to sort of come out at you, or basically not being able to sort of survey the landscape properly would make you feel less safe. And so this actually provoked quite a bit of conversation in my session. And then also just having a more enclosed built environment generally, having, you know, taller buildings relative to the width of the street and having more buildings also made people feel like it was a safer place. Again, somewhat counter to you know, conventional wisdom in crime geography. And then going and looking at more sort of quantitative measures of safety, this time related to traffic. And I do think that the perceived safety survey here was probably skewed towards sense of personal safety. I don't think people necessarily looked at those pictures and said, I wonder if a car is going to hit me. I think it had a lot more to do with, you know, sense of security in a personal safety way, but that's not something that we can really suss out. This data set is actual traffic crashes in New York City that we compared to many of the same sort of micro design aspects of the streetscape. And again, we see sort of very similar tendencies where streets that were higher in width were less safe in terms of the severity of crashes. Higher height was more safe, and the reason the arrows point the way they do is because it's about severity, so higher severity or lower severity. You know, things like cross-sectional proportion, so having a more sort of dense built environment actually had the effect of reducing crash severity, which is a really sort of good result. It's very supportive of urbanism that is encouraging things like infill development. And again, you see tree canopy coverage down at the bottom, similarly supported lower intensity crashes. So, you know, this is a very provoking slide for many transportation engineers who are, you know, interested in removing things like fixed object hazards on the roadway. Trees are certainly a fixed object hazard, and so the session prompted a really interesting conversation between transportation folks that had come to see stuff like this and the crime folks who had, again, just a very different literature background. So I'm going to end there and move back to Jeff.
Right, and then I'll segue into the final section. Seems to work out well. All right, so my discussion on my research will be brief because I'm really here to talk about transportation geography at the AAG as the communications director for the specialty group. So first I'll just briefly touch on my research. You're only supposed to submit one thing to AAG per year. I ended up doing both a poster and a presentation because one was under my advisor's name and he just gave it to me to do anyway. So this is that. It's a side project by myself, Sarah Moser, who's a geography professor who studies new master plan cities in the global south, and Kevin Minow, my advisor, who studies active transport and sustainability policy type things. Women in Saudi Arabia are the most educated and wealthy as any point in their history, but they can't drive around, which limits their mobility. The city of Riyadh, the capital, is designing a metro system that will be completed by 2019 that will be very low cost, spread throughout this giant sprawling city and give people an alternative to moving around aside from chauffeured drivers and pretty much a lack of any other public transport. The buses are really for migrant laborers and not really socially acceptable for women at all. So using documents from their plans and media and what Saudi planners and professionals say when they speak to the media, we construe what we think will happen when the metro is completed and how it will affect not just the movement of Saudi women, but how their capabilities are built as they're able to move around independently in a gender segregated society. The results span from increased household incomes from being able to access more appropriate jobs to broader social diversification and economic diversification as oil takes a lower, or the Saudi economy diversifies to balance against oil risk and things like that. I also presented a poster based on my thesis research here in Vermont, which discussed, it was an applied project modeling and exploring transportation accessibility to healthcare for people who use Medicare seniors in Vermont, and fell in line with a lot of the existing literature on rural healthcare accessibility, showing that a melange of social networks, physical transport access, and the qualities of the healthcare facilities themselves affect their ability to reach healthcare. So those two projects aside, I'm here to talk about the AAG Transportation Geography Specialty Group, which is the little TRB inside of the massive field of geography. We have about 300 members out of the organization, 250, 300, something like that, who at the conference we organize sessions and field trips. Sessions are where you present your posters or presentations. Field trips are where we can get together with like-minded professionals and explore the city where the conference is being held and look at an issue, and then it's a networking function, but you learn something along the way. We also award dissertation and thesis awards and professional awards such as the Edward L. Ullman Award, which is given to people who have distinguished research over the course of their career. This year it was awarded to a woman named Karen Lucas from the University of Leeds, who studies transport exclusion, or social exclusion in transport. And then the following year, after you win the Ullman Award, you get to do a lecture where you're the keynote speaker for transportation geography at the conference. This year it was a guy named Bert Van Wee from the Netherlands. He does something similar to Karen, transport exclusion and sustainability, things like that. But the group itself has people from modelers to discourse analysts of transport. It's a lot of different fields who get together and covering all bases of transport geography.
Jeff, can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
So it's the Transportation Geography Specialty Group.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
saying all those
yeah.
syllables, I just say transport. Yeah.
No, I was still sitting here thinking, how can there be a geography specialty group in the AAG?
Oh.
But you mean the I got you.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm talking faster than I think. All right.
No, I'm reading wrong, Jeff.
So and my primary goal in all this is to outreach through social media and our website to get this sort of information out and to coordinate things as the conference approaches for which sessions will involve what and what you can target your work this is an unofficial, non-scientific way of demonstrating our reach. The website hits from across the globe, from our website since it came up in May 2015. Mostly US, but we get researchers everywhere from China to Germany and Africa, and it's growing every day. And the next time we will all be officially meeting will be in San Francisco from March 29th, that's a day off, to April 2nd in 2016. You can join us on Facebook, Twitter, and then hear updates as we discuss things amongst ourselves, including recent literature, events in the committee itself, or the specialty group itself, and just random insights that pop up on the Facebook wall from doctoral students, things that pop in their mind. All right, so I'm going to move on to the slides after yours.
There's one slide that basically says,
okay, officially.
Now that we've sort of gotten a sense of what we all do,
right.
Let's talk about how to sort of perpetuate the interaction between transportation and geography here at UVM. And I'm realizing that I forgot to allow other people who weren't presenting to go around and just introduce themselves. And so I wonder if we might do that, or if I also introduce you and maybe didn't include everything that you wanted people to know. So, how?
I'll start since I'm an outsider. I'm Ingrid Malmgren. We've met before. I work for Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. I'm a transportation policy manager. And I got my master's at UVM in geography, so this came across my inbox and I said I thought it looked interesting. So.
Terrific.
I'm Mandar Dolkar. I'm a faculty of civil and environmental engineering at UVM.
And I'm Lisa Altenwald. Don't know where I work at UVM, but I love transportation.
Jake Leopold, I'm here with the Transportation Research Center.
I'm Robert Wolf, also here at the Transportation Research Center.
Great. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this is a little embarrassing to admit, but the time that I submitted an idea to AAG, we got to the room, the 3 speakers, and it was only the 3 speakers. And we had a really great time actually presenting to each other. And it left me, and even though I loved the conference, the keynotes were amazing, and the other sessions I attended that had nothing to do with transportation. And so it left me wondering how big the transport geography group is. Like, how many people were in your sessions? How was the response? Does it vary? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Maybe you know best.
I'll say a couple of things, but I did see Pablo there as well, so we can have stuff to add. I know Pablo's session was extremely well attended, and there were people who were standing up the entire time. Mine, it was in a session that was weirdly placed, trains, even though mine is more of a transit project, so I had to, it was half filled and not entirely matching with our research, but I would still say people had great discussion. It was a good time.
Like half filled 10 or half filled 100?
2 dozen instead of 4 dozen. Yeah. I did not see any that had such a close-knit group.
I've had that experience, certainly at the AG. My own personal feeling, this is not just about the AG, but big conferences in general, are almost useless to me personally, unless I either participate in or design myself a sort of mini conference within it, which is one of the reasons I like to participate in those smaller group sessions, because then usually and that's at least been my experience at the AG, it lasted a while. Part of the reason that it was well attended was that, and this can be a challenge in some ways, is sometimes it's the same people,
right,
and it's kind of a closed circle, which is one of the reasons I like the fact that we combined with, like, there was a very clear North American, European divide amongst the scholars, but then I thought there was actually some really productive conversations. For example, the race and mobility stuff, a lot of the European scholars do more of the social exclusion type work, whereas this was more rooted in more of an anti-racist kind of framework. And so that I thought was really, really useful for me. So I think it can be hit or miss because it's so big. And there's a lot of transportation related work that actually is in other things, so not just trains,
Like
but
urban
I'm sorry?
Like urban.
Well, urban, so
Yeah.
that, for me, like, the urban had as many people who were doing something that was mobility or transport related, but they wasn't always under that.
Right.
And it's, unlike TRB, it's not a peer-reviewed submission. You can anyone can go and present something. And so, when I'm looking at the program, I look for the sort of organized sessions because you know the qualities can be really good. And so you end up with interesting people in the room for those as well, asking good questions.
And the panels, I think, are really good. I'd spoken to Glenn about doing a barack, trying to get Karen Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd spoken at least a couple of times about that. I had spoken to Karen Lucas, and she couldn't last year, but I'm hoping to bring her here.
She's great. I'd come down and see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, I mean, I was not part of an organized session this year. I just sort of threw it into the general pile of papers and got stuck in this crime geography session, which at first I was like, this is going to seem really incongruent. And it did. I mean, it was nothing like any of the other presentations, but it was probably sparked the most sort of intense conversation and was really healthy for me to step back and say, okay, wait a second, I need to look at this literature more seriously, and ended up incorporating like a whole section of a lit review into a different paper because of that. So I walked out of it feeling a little pummeled, but it was good.
Sarah, what about you?
My session was the national parks, so it's a 50 people attend. Not too many talking about transportation.
Sorry. Oh, that's okay. Mine was an organized session, which I had nothing to do with organizing. I just kind of submitted my abstract. And, it was on critical transportation. And I remember I remember seeing you in there.
Standing in the back.
Yeah, and it was a tiny room, and it was really full.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like way undersized for, I think, the program coordinators had done a poor job on that.
That seems to happen every year.
Yeah, it's like you see these vast cavernous spaces with 150 chairs or 75 chairs or whatever, and there's 7 people in them. And then next door, there's some tiny room, like fully this size, and completely packed. People are out in the hallways and everything. So I think it's just probably really hard.
And throughout the whole conference, were there other youth-focused topics in good number, and were you the only youth transport?
Well, the session I was in was I thought was really interesting. It was pretty diverse topics within this sort of loose critical transportation framework. And it was coordinated by a couple of grad students, I think at CUNY, who are trying to start this group. And mine was the only one on youth. And so it was great. I mean, it was like lots of great questions and, really good conversations. And
Was it the CUNY person who's doing the stuff on bike couriers?
Oh.
Because there was a whole group from CUNY.
Yeah, I don't know
That's
what that, there was
fantastic.
one in like doing some kind of Mexican railway historical
yeah.
GIS thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just like a
What
wacky
does-
session. But
What does CUNY stand for?
Sorry, City University of New York.
Okay.
So it's not Hunter, is it? Is it whatever it is?
Yeah.
It's a graduate school of geography.
it's not geography.
No.
So very urban.
It's like
setting.
some long.
Yeah, but they had other, because I remember this person who was like a historical geographer, or no, of Mexican railroad.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
The historical GIS thing.
Right, that's right.
Mexican
So there's-
railway strikes or something. It's like, wow, that's quite a,
But the person who won the urban dissertation award also won one of the transportation awards.
Astrid?
No, well, yeah, she won too. So there was a couple of people who had done both the urban and the transportation, and they were fantastic. The woman who came to interview for the postdoc here,
Shaolu.
Yeah, I mean, really, really interesting stuff around mobility in Queens. So there was a lot of overlap that I saw between the urban and the transport. So.
I think that's one, we're just just looking at this big question. I think, you know, within the discipline of geography, the notion of mobility has completely, like, just become very, very powerful. And so I think to the extent, you know, there's parts of that sort of mobility, and some people say, oh, the mobility turn, like, everything is a turn these days, but how many times can we turn? But I think that, you know, there's certainly a lot about mobility that isn't necessarily related directly to transportation. But I think to the extent that they do overlap and intersect, that has been an area of a lot of growth. And I don't know, I'd be interested to hear what the transportation geography specialty group thinks of that. Like they, you know, the mobility turns, so-called, is sort of coming from a lot of the critical geography work and social justice and you know, queer theory and those kinds of fields. And you know, they're bumping up against what had been quite a bit of a stodgy, you know, quantitative, unchanging piece of the discipline, and maybe ruffling some feathers along the way. I would be curious what you perspective
the
is.
official stuff for next year they're discussing over email right now before I officially get to say what's happening. But yeah, I've seen a turn in who has led the committee over the past decade, and you've got all these stodgy people who are great. They've written great books that I've read, but
absolutely,
it's gone from sort of quantitative modeling based off of central place theory to really the social dimensions, the environmental dimensions, and this. It seems like transport geography is more of a, what would you call it, praxis, where all these other fields are meeting about movement. And to put it short, it's becoming more enriching and welcoming to other disciplines and other points of view.
And I was also really struck, and partly this is driven, I think, by one of my collaborators, Justin, reaching out to some of his networks for, but some of the really interesting kind of mobile methodologies and the different techniques that people are using. The most interesting paper in our session, I thought, was this woman who, at Oxford, who was working with a children's charity for the blind. It's like children losing sight.
Oh, Kate Middleton.
Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah.
And she did this like fantastic thing where they were using, with the research assistants they had, many of whom had been part of this charity but had aged out. But in order to improve subway system for visually impaired, they had a number of their assistants wearing GoPros and going into the subway system, and there was a whole methodology around this. But it was really interesting to see and hear the people's voices around how they understood whether it was a 4 or an 8 train, how they negotiated space getting through. I mean, it was just fascinating. Beyond simply hearing about it, to be able to actually see that, it was really. So some of that stuff really struck me as being very innovative and productive. So.
Right, and it's Jeannie Middleton.
Did you say Kate? Because
Yeah.
I know it was Middleton, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
But yeah, her and Justin do very nice work involving the lived experience of moving around.
Yeah.
But it seems to me, aside from the mobility overlap between transportation and geography also have this sort of definitional or administrative experience that is the same, in the sense that it's social science, humanities, science, engineering, all mixed in both. Everybody's got a different definition of each of them. You know, people who do meteorology are really different from people who do many types of social geography. And so when I look at sort of the end of Glenn's question here at UVM, I think we also have to remember that we have that commonality of being misunderstood by everybody who isn't in the group. This need to define ourselves over and over and over again, which gets kind of old. I guess you guys can fall back on, well, geography at UVM is those of us who are in this structural department, but that's not even a
That's
right
not necessarily
definition at
helpful.
all. No.
It
There's lots of
doesn't mean a whole
geographers
lot.
who aren't in your department. So,
I see geography sort of leading the way towards the turn of studying transportation as an experience rather than just sort of the structure and system of it. So I sort of look to the way that geography has made that turn as a guide for how I would sort of like to take my study of transportation. That it's something we can sort of like learn. I still feel very new in the transportation world and thinking about the experience of transportation in a way that I don't in the geography world. Is the question that I've thought of when formulating this, or the secondary question was, do we feel like the TRC is the organization to which the geographer should come to study transport, or is it the other way around? And or like how should we sort of set ourselves up institutionally in order to bring these two things together? And maybe I guess I pose that to the geographers who have come to the TRC for this. I mean, does that feel like a good way for you of bridging between the two?
Well, Lisa and Mondar have heard me say this many times, but I think one of our big difficulties I mean, 3 of us are members of like the faculty, right? And Paulo and I and Beverly. But I think one of the big sticky points for us is that we don't have a graduate program.
Okay.
I mean, Ingrid was one of our last graduates.
And that was a while ago.
The master's, the master's program was dismantled in 2004. So that's a sort of structural issue that means that it's tricky for us to be involved in things in the same way as, say, a Rubenstein faculty member. And I mean, it's not like we've been just horribly held back or anything like that, but it just means because a lot of the TRC work, does depend on graduate students as well as, grants that involve graduate education and things like that. That's just been sort of, as I said, it's more of a structural issue,
Yeah.
but it does kind of end up accumulating into some. Probably some truncated interactions that could be happening if we had a graduate program, and we might at some point if we get our act together.
And I think it's interesting because a lot of our students are clearly interested in transportation issues. One of our top graduates from this past year, he graduated, and 2 days later he started a position with CCRPC as a transportation
Actually,
planner.
he started before he graduated.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All right, 2 days after he defended his thesis.
Yeah.
That's right. But I mean, he started as a transportation planner, and his, he'd done some work studying abroad. But he did all of his prep for that without interacting with the TRC. Really.
That's interesting. He took Brian's class.
Oh, he took Brian's class.
So
Right.
able
And
to
so people,
research.
that's right, and he does take, and Richard's class as well.
Yeah.
That's right. So it's been to a lesser degree, and sometimes people have internships, and so that's right. Because Sammy did an internship through TRC as well. So I mean, there's been some involvement in those kinds of ways. Our students clearly have an interest. We don't teach a transport geography class, so that's maybe one. They get it through Richard sometimes, and Richard teaches it.
But Megan teaches an urban geography class that has a decent proportion of transportation.
It does. My urban class is there's quite a lot of like planning history in it, like sort of American cities from the Industrial Revolution onward. I'm like, what did industrialization do to American city systems? And obviously transportation is a huge element of that. So it's in there, but it's not. For students who are really interested in it, it's not. It's just like a little appetizer.
And it's the same for me with my development class.
Yeah.
My development class has like significant components that are transport related, but it's not the central focus.
So it sounds like undergrad geographers is sort of a group of students on campus that we might think about how we would interact excited about it, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to sort of tap that enthusiasm and get them involved. I'm not sure exactly how we're doing it, but it's good to think about.
One thing that I've as some of you know, I also serve on CCTA's board, and one of the things that's come up at different points has been how to interact more. You know, there's lots of research that CCTA or other entities might need, how to get more connected with UVM. And I know Glenn's met with the new GM and things like that. But you know, I have somebody who's, I have a student who's doing an internship with their planning department. We have other students who are out there. They asked, you know, they came to me and they were looking at Medicaid transport, or it was something like that, and they wanted somebody. And I ended up getting somebody from medical school. And so, you know, there's a desire sometimes for that, and so that's been one way of. But it would be nice to formalize it a little bit more, I think, in some ways.
Well, and Glenn and I talked a couple weeks ago about the interest in planning on campus, and I, you know, I think in a lot of ways, a lot of our students coming up through the undergrad geography, I think a lot of their interests do revolve around planning, and of course transportation is a huge piece of that, and you can specialize in it and so forth. So I think there are some, you know, potential future, you know, connections in, you know, even at the undergrad level that could be sustained.
Well, we're pushing our time limit here. I just have one last question for Jeff, but if folks feel like they need to go, feel free. Thank you for coming. Jeff, I just wanted to ask how you felt like the transition was from the TRC into a really geography-focused environment, and whether that felt appropriate or you know, whether you felt prepared, or I mean, sort of how that went for you.
Oh yeah. No, that signifies a positive response. So the TRC, at least my experience with it, involved a lot of using the TRC to do applied work with Vermont as a whole, and those sort of connections, seeing people present the TRC, meeting people at the TRC, and then speaking with them later about my own research. I got a feeling for how transportation worked in the real world outside of the models that I learned in my undergraduate courses in transport geography. So it certainly helped me transition to a geography department at a doctoral level, even though I didn't take any courses here that said the word geography in it. So highly recommend this as a jumping point to a doctoral program in geography.
Yeah.
Remind us where you did your undergrad degree.
UConn.
I think I remember that.
Shao, any last thought? I mean, you presented at AAG. How did you find out about it? Or I mean, like, do you feel like you're tapped into the geography department? Is it something that Bob does he sort of like infuse the geography conversation?
Well, I think that the session that I'm attending AAG is mostly about national parks, but there's really not many researches about this topic. So I think, but like the things that I learned from AAG is a lot of cartography, like and like GIS technique that used in the social science research that I think is very helpful for both like park studies lab and my research.
But if I recall correctly, you're a trained geographer too. You have 2 degrees in geography.
I have my master is human degree is human geography.
Okay. But not your undergrad.
No.
Oh, okay.
And so had you gone to AAG before
No.
as well? Okay.
Do you have anything, has anything come out of the lab on the work that you're doing? I've talked to Bob before about this, because I'd actually like to use this in my race and ethnicity class.
Oh, I'm the
sports. but I do a bunch of stuff around. But anyway, so if do you have anything that's come out of this research already in print?
This is my dissertation for this project, but I have one study that has submitted to Leisure Science.
Mhm.
It's still under review,
Okay.
but this paper, I have finished the draft and I'm working on to submit that to another journal. But I'm happy to share the result with you. And we're still working on this project, and there is a lot of data that still need work more.
Okay. Yeah, I've been bugging Bob
Bob
for a
and
while.
Dan have a paper come out in print.
Oh yeah, there is a professor from sociology, Daniel Krakowski,
Right.
and he has a paper came from Journal of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism.
Okay.
In the last year, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Thanks.
Well, that's a good positive note, I think, to finish up on. Thank you everyone for coming, and yeah, there's fruitful stuff for the future.
Thanks for
Thank
doing
you.
us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you.